Hi, everybody, and welcome to this Q&A session for Situ. As a reminder, my name is Sophia Wood. I am the country manager for Operation Wallaceia's Ecuador programs, as well as running our Friends of Wallacea initiative that works with OpWall partners to develop sustainable tourism businesses that support conservation efforts throughout the year. Today, we are lucky enough to have with us Sian Green, who will be talking a little bit more about her work monitoring mammals with camera traps and citizen science. Sian is a PhD candidate in anthropology and biology at Durham University, and she's also been the large mammal survey leader with the OpWall expeditions in Transylvania. Thank you so much for joining us this morning, Sian.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here.
We're very excited to ask a bunch of questions about mammals. Obviously, that video of the baby foxes in your presentation was so adorable. And I can imagine that obviously not 100% of camera trapping involves looking at adorable videos of baby foxes.
No, unfortunately not. But the rest of it doesn't do so well on social media. The video of like the blank tree just sort of waving back and forth.
Yeah, I've done obviously some camera trapping at the Ecuador site, and you end up with about 3/4 or more of your footage being leaves, moths, rain, and then all of a sudden you get something really, really cool. So I know how much work you must have put in to get that video of the foxes. So just as we get started in these questions, I wanted to ask a little bit kind of how you got started with camera trapping, and specifically kind of getting involved with camera trapping for your MRes. And was your experience with camera trapping a factor in joining that program?
Yeah, I definitely think so. I first got experience camera trapping sort of through luck in terms of what came up during my undergrad. And then I knew I wanted to do a master's by research because the thing I enjoyed most during undergrad was doing my own research project.
Okay.
And I was thinking that I did want to do a PhD, but I thought a master's by research is kind of like quite a good like test run.
Yes.
And so then I was applying for projects and looking for MReses. And then the one I went for kind of assigns you a project based on like previous experience. So yeah, that obviously kind of fitted in nicely there.
So if you started getting experience with camera trapping in your undergraduate degree then?
Yeah, so that's when I went out to South Africa and joined a project there doing camera trapping. So that's when I first got into it.
Well, that sounds like a very good undergraduate program. I'm lucky to get to go to South Africa.
I realized, right place at the right time.
Yes,
and like definitely. My supervisor was supervising someone else who was doing a PhD in South Africa, and they're like, "You want to come over?" I'm like, "Yeah."
That's awesome. Before I dig into that question, I realized I forgot to shout out for anybody who's watching this live. If you have any questions, please feel free to put them on either the Facebook or the YouTube chat, or you can email us at xc2@opwall.com. And if you're watching this on the OpWall website, you can click the YouTube button to open the stream in a new tab, and that will give you access to the chat. Finally, if you want to get a notification when we release new episodes of XC2, you can sign up for our newsletter on the XC2 page on the OpWall website. Sorry, I missed that. So you mentioned that you were lucky enough then to be in the right place at the right time to start doing this camera trapping work in South Africa during your undergraduate degree. Do you have any advice to people who are currently either looking at an undergraduate degree or in an undergraduate degree about how to get involved in research early on?
Just ask people. So it was a bit sort of unconventional because the university was a little bit worried about sending people to places that you didn't know if you were going to get the right data. So it was kind of a bit of a risk when we went out there. But I knew I kind of wanted to do something like field work based and to do with wildlife and conservation. So yeah, we just went and asked our supervisors, and they said, if you're willing to take a risk, yeah, you can go for it. But you have to kind of be a bit proactive and go and ask people and find out who at the university is doing the kind of research that you're interested in. And yeah, as long as you're polite and friendly, like, yeah, there's no harm in asking.
I think that's good advice. And obviously, when you're in an academic environment, there's tons of people around to, help guide those kinds of questions and get you into opportunities to do research. Do you have any advice for people looking to get involved with conservation work in general, even if, past the academic standpoint or before they start university?
So there's obviously, volunteering routes. And I do think sort of volunteering and getting involved in citizen science. So that's obviously something I'm quite involved in now, not just like overly promoting. It's great. But
Okay.
it is a great way to get involved in sort of actual research, and you can have a go at different, techniques, help improve like ID skills, and get a feel for what kind of things you might be doing when you do research.
Right. That's, I mean, I think citizen science, obviously we do a lot of that work with OpWall,
Yeah.
so feel free, you can shout it out. Obviously it's a great way to start getting involved and getting an idea of also what it means to do the research, even if it's to a much kind of lower degree, depending on how you get involved. So speaking of citizen science, is the perception of citizen science being unreliable starting to go away, or is that something that's still prevalent in the scientific community that you're still kind of fighting against with Mammal Web and your other projects?
I think it's not gone away completely, but it's definitely, citizen science is recognized as being very valuable, and, legitimate science. So there's still ways that we have to consider, how the data can be used so that it's, correctly done, and so that we can be confident in sort of classifications,
Of course.
on sort of animal IDs. But I think it's more about having the correct procedure in place and having a good methodology, which is the same for any kind of science. So if you have the right methodology in place, there's no reason why it's not as good as.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are there any bottlenecks in citizen science, either because there are too few projects using this methodology or too few people contributing?
Sometimes definitely there's too few people, in terms of getting people engaged and trying to get a wide diversity of people engaged, because sometimes there's just sort of a very stereotypical group that gets involved in certain types of, sort of citizen science. Whereas, it would be nice to have that opportunity for everyone to kind of get involved and make people aware of it. Because there's always more, especially with camera trapping, there's always more photos to be tagged.
Yes, definitely. So what do you think are better, or kind of some of the best ways to get more people and hopefully more diversity of people involved in citizen science?
I think start with its awareness,
Okay.
in terms of, how we promote our projects and where we promote them. Because obviously if people never even heard of it, then that's step one, isn't it? And making sure people have the resources that they need to get involved, or making sure your project doesn't need a lot of resources to get involved, and just having a bit of flexibility in there as well. And I think it's putting more effort into the outreach side.
Sure. And you mentioned a friend of yours and also some of your work working with schools and younger people getting involved in citizen science really early on. Are elementary and middle schools a place that we should be looking to start doing citizen science projects right away?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's more interesting as well for, lots of children doing science if they can see it. It's not just doing it for the sake of doing schoolwork, which is, I think, is what a lot of kids like complain about. But if you can kind of see it's actually contributing to something, they might be more motivated to get into it.
Yeah, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. Obviously, OPWL works with much older students, but it is the same concept that is very different to learn about alleles in a biology classroom than to go out and look at different frog species and how they're interbreeding and what that means in terms of what they look like and all that. And, just that hands-on aspect. And it sounds like obviously what you've been talking about is just even seeing European mammals, which is pretty rare, I would say, for most Europeans, maybe besides some deer. So I would guess that would have an impact. So are large mammals in Europe and areas outside of Africa at risk of being understudied because of kind of the charisma and the draw of African mammals?
Um, it's kind of hard to say exactly because there's definitely areas in Europe where there are species that are understudied, but there's also definitely species in Africa and areas in Africa that are also understudied. So I don't know if it's completely sort of like a cause and effect, but there are definitely areas in both.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes it's more of a media problem. So
Mm,
sort of in the UK, we'll see more about sort of like elephants and rhinos and sort of lions on the news than we do about sort of European species, so, like bears and wolves
sure.
or like documentaries and stuff as well. So then people just sort
Yeah,
of,
that makes sense. And obviously there are big charismatic mammals in every part of the world. Are there areas where camera trapping is more or less effective, or kind of habitats where maybe it doesn't work as well or it works a lot better than certain areas?
I think, I mean, when camera trapping first developed as a technique, it was sort of specifically for like forested areas and sort of aiming at like big cats. So generally, like, it was really for tigers and then leopards and things like that.
Mhm.
But since then, it's really been used in sort of a really wide range of environments, and I think people are adapting the techniques and developing it. So, yeah, there's definitely different ways that you can adapt it to use in lots of different places.
Right. That makes sense. So, getting into a little bit kind of the details of this research and your methodology and your experience, because obviously you've, taken thousands of camera trap photos all over, especially obviously Romania, but it sounds like all over Europe in general and Africa. So, you mentioned that some mammals can see the infrared flash or smell the camera, hear sounds, and it kind of spooks them or obviously affects their behavior in some way. Um, did you find that individuals in the same species acted in similar ways to the cameras, and that it made certain species harder to study?
So yeah, there's definitely some species that are more prone to either being scared or being extra curious. So they'll
Hmm.
come up. But then there is still variation between individuals within a species. So you get braver individuals and less brave individuals, or within a species as well. And there might be some differences, say between like males and females. Do they react differently? So there are kind of areas there that we're not, that people don't really know exactly how that's going to influence things yet. So for some data, it might not make too much difference. So if you're just kind of getting a species inventory, as long as you've recorded that species,
Right.
it's not going to influence your data. But if you're wanting to go into more like behavioral, then that's when you kind of have to think about it a bit more, I think.
Yeah, that makes sense. So is it feasible to do behavioral studies through camera trapping, or do you have to capture such a large amount of footage that it doesn't really make sense to do it in that way?
Yeah, you can do behavioral studies through camera trapping, definitely. And people are, especially within sort of primatology.
Okay,
Uh,
yes.
but again, it's just sort of making sure you've got it set up correctly to answer your question. Because even within behavioral, if you're studying behavior, there's still like a wide range of things you could be looking at. Are you counting sort of activity patterns or like activity times as kind of behavioral? Um, because obviously camera traps can trap that quite well. Um, yeah, or if you're looking for like specific behaviors, setting cameras up at specific locations where those behaviors are going to occur, and getting videos and kind of monitoring that way as well.
That makes sense. So this kind of gets into the behavioral question. I guess obviously it sounds like all the camera traps that you're setting are in basically natural settings in which you're trying not to alter the area that you visited, so that the animals will you will get capture a relatively natural pattern of how the animals are flowing through a certain ecosystem or habitat. Do you ever bait the cameras with either food or scent to try to get a better picture of, or a picture of how many species are in the area, kind of artificially drawing them to the camera?
So personally, I haven't really baited, but a lot of people do, and there are good reasons for baiting. Because if you think about it, if you're putting a camera trap into one space, the only thing the camera trap can actually see is a relatively small area in front of it, whereas you're counting that camera as kind of surveying a wider area. So especially if you're just kind of getting a species inventory, by luring the camera to the animals to come in front of the camera itself, you're not skewing it too much, because if you're, they're not traveling that far away to come in front of the camera.
I guess it depends how pungent the smell is that you're using.
Yeah. If you want to try and ID to individual level as well, so if you're looking for facial characteristics or markings, you need the animal to at least stay in front of the camera for a little bit longer and try and get show different sides of it. So that's when it can be really useful as well.
Right, that makes sense. So I lost my question here. I wanted to ask you, what kind of camera traps do you use and recommend? What brands or what specific kinds?
I do like the Browning trail camera traps, but it sort of depends on your budget, to be honest.
Okay.
Because they can be quite expensive. There are cheaper ones that people have found have worked quite well. So things like Victure or 8-Man, they've just got offline for £50 or something like that. Yeah. So some of them, they get good results. I'm not as sure about their reliability. Fortunately, most of my camera traps that I use come from university or through organizations. So you get, can get hold of these Brownings through that, which are really good to use.
Yeah, that makes sense. How many camera traps do you tend to set up for one of your research projects?
Again, that's a very sort of broad question, because how big a space are you trying to cover, and what are you trying to answer that question? What questions are you trying to answer, essentially? Recently, my most recent survey, I had 30 cameras, but I had them in pairs because I was testing different settings.
Right.
But then because I only had, so there was 15 locations at a time, so then I had to rotate them around to cover it. So they ended up covering 75 different locations.
Wow.
So again, it depends what species you're studying, how far do they travel, how close do you need your camera traps to be, how big is the overall area, and how long do you have.
So you must have done a lot of walking over this last project, it sounds like. What species were you studying?
We were studying a range of species, so within the Forest of Dean. So we basically were doing a sort of general survey, but also because the Gloucestershire Wildlife Trust, who I was working with there, recently introduced pine martins into the forest. So we didn't do so well at camera trapping them, but it was good to see whether that technique would work for them. Mm-hmm. And obviously, if they were going to use that technique, they would need to modify it a bit to make it more effective.
Sure, that makes sense. So have you ever seen or discovered any strange or new mammal behavior from camera trap footage? Maybe what's the weirdest thing you've ever seen on a camera trap?
I think it's the weirdest thing I've ever seen. I'm not sure. I always think whenever I get two species on a camera trap, it's always interesting. I can't think of anything super weird, but it's always interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree. We got in Ecuador last year, we got a tapir and a caiman on the same shot, and that was so cool.
That's really cool.
But I know, obviously, I mean, again, that video of the foxes is really special. Did you know that the fox den was there to be able to put the camera trap? Okay.
Yeah, I did. I actually have to give a bit of credit to our dog. So I'd seen they knew there were foxes in that woods, and she was just really interested in this area. So I was like, oh, I'll just follow you. And he went through and it's clearly a den for something. So I was like, oh, I'll put a camera here. And yeah, very cute.
That's very lucky. Well, if you think of something crazy, obviously, the camera traps give you this opportunity to get this little window into mammals' worlds. So it's very cool sometimes to see, obviously, these two species interactions. Which two species come to mind with your two species on a camera trap?
What fun ones I got? The other day I was going through my footage and there was a rabbit that had such a close escape. So like there's just like, oh look, it's a nice rabbit, and then it like zooms and this fox is like just like so close, like less than a meter away from it, and they just sort of like disappear. So that was pretty cool. Yeah,
that's really cool. That's really cool, and amazing that your camera was speedy enough to get that. I would imagine.
I think the rabbit had a bit of a lucky escape, to be honest. I think it was just the rabbit that triggered it, and it was just like, and then it was just, fox came out of nowhere.
Sounds like you've got some pretty wild woods near your place wherever you're doing this research. I'm not seeing a lot of foxes chasing rabbits where I am right now. I could use some, actually. We've got a lot of rabbits in my garden here. So you showed us a video of a picture of a very obese raccoon, and which obviously isn't native. Do you know where that raccoon came from, or have any other examples of unexpected species that you found in areas where they're maybe not native or not seen?
So I think the raccoon, we believe, was a pet. And then either escaped or someone sort of got a raccoon and realized a raccoon is a really bad pet.
Yeah.
And then just sort of let it go. It's probably, unfortunately, the most likely answer.
Sure.
There was also some ring-tailed coatis that were found wandering.
Yeah, that was pretty unusual. Yeah, that's very far from home.
Yeah, so it seems sort of similar thing. But that's where most sort of non-native species are going to be coming from. Its releases.
That's too bad. And have you ever caught any strange, unexpected species in Romania or in Africa?
Trying to think. Not unexpected, I wouldn't say. Like everything was within its designated range. Sure. But still really cool. So I think what's really exciting, I think, for me going to Romania, so obviously the bears, like just getting to camera trap bears is just really cool. But I think wildcats as well. They were kind of than I expected. And within the UK, you only have like a very small population in like Scotland. So it's kind of nice to see, proper European wildcats is still, doing okay in some places.
But the wildcats, I mean, obviously the bears you might occasionally see in the flesh, but the wildcats are very shy, are they?
Yeah, and obviously they're so much smaller. So like, they could be like meters away from you and they just like disappear into the forest.
Sure. Have you ever seen them?
I've never seen one in the wild. That would be really cool.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of pictures of them, and obviously they're so cool. I feel like there's something that's not really advertised much in terms of European wildlife, whereas the bears and the wolves get a lot of credit.
Yeah.
So they're really cool. And you mentioned ecotourism is a reason why mammals are also important to conservation, but not just looking at safaris, obviously. Are there places in Europe where people can go and still see mammals?
Yeah, there's lots of places. I mean, even in Romania, when we're not there with Opal, like bear watching is like quite a big thing in quite a lot of the towns. Which I was very tempted to do. Like the first time I was there, like if I don't see a bear, I'm going afterwards and I'm going for like a bear tour because I'm not leaving until I see one.
Well, we now do that with the Dept in just outside of Sighișoara. So
nice.
Obviously, if anyone's looking for a bear tour, you can hit us up. But I haven't yet seen a Romanian bear. But obviously, I think few people know that there's still areas in Europe where you can see wildlife like bears.
Yeah, and I think there's lots of different places. I'd quite like to go to Spain because they do a lot of tourism around the links, the Iberian links as well, like around Portugal and Spain. That'd be very cool.
That's awesome. So we've just got about 5 minutes to go. So I want to ask you a question that I've asked everybody that's come on so far about your PhD. But obviously, if anybody has any final questions for Sian while we're on with her live, you can send them through to xsitu@opwall.com, or you can send them in the chat on the Facebook or YouTube live. We'll still be here for about 5 more minutes. So if you have any burning last questions, please send them through. So as we're wrapping up, I wanted to ask you, you're now kind of in the throes of a PhD program. And obviously a lot of the people who are following our XC2 series are, studying biology, thinking about studying biology, potentially going into a research field. So I was wondering if you could maybe tell us kind of why you chose to do a PhD and what advice you might have to people who are thinking about doing a PhD.
Why? I just really enjoyed doing research and wildlife conservation, and I kind of knew I wanted to do like wildlife research. That's what I wanted to do.
Yep.
So, but advice, I did take a couple of breaks where I wasn't 100% sure how I knew I wanted to do, work in wildlife conservation, but I wasn't sure which direction exactly I was going to go in. But I think that was actually quite useful. So in terms of advice is don't panic and don't rush. I know a lot of people that have perhaps gone straight from, undergrad to masters or even undergrad straight to PhD without a break. And that's just quite full on, and you don't really have any time to think. And it works for some people. If you have, the right program comes up, that's fine.
Sure.
But don't panic and just go for one if it's not the right one. And if you don't get, one, the first PhD you apply for, that's kind of normal.
Okay.
Make sure you talk to the supervisors
as
well beforehand, and see if that's somewhere that you want to live and somewhere that you want to work. Because it's not just your PhD, you're moving somewhere to live there for, 4 years of your life. So you need to enjoy it as well.
I think that's really good advice. Obviously, taking on a PhD is an absolutely massive undertaking and very life-defining for a lot of people. Think through the process, just because obviously we've gotten lots of people who are coming from all sorts of different backgrounds and studying different aspects of wildlife conservation. So as we're wrapping up, just wanted to ask, obviously, are there any social media or websites or any projects that you want to shout out before we close up here so that people can keep following your work?
Yeah, so we're always looking for anyone to get involved in MammalWeb. So as a citizen science project, it's open for everyone to get involved with. So that's just www.mammalweb.org. And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. And I'll be on there. I'm on Twitter as well as just Sian Green 92, very imaginative. So easy enough to find though. Excellent.
Well, thank you so much for your time chatting with us, Sian. Obviously, mammals are, I think, a really exciting and fun topic, and it's great to hear that there are ways for people who aren't, 100% dedicated their whole lives to biology to actually get involved and help with research around the world and work with people like you who are, trying to conserve some of probably the more vulnerable populations around the world. So thank you so much for chatting. It was a great conversation, and thank you for giving the lecture for XC2.
Oh, awesome. Thank you for inviting me and having me on. It's been fun.
Well, thank you, everybody. We'll see you next week on our next Q&A for XC2. Thank you. Bye.